Welcome back to another Boxscore Geeks show. I'm your host, Ray Alvarez, and with me, as always, is my producer, voice of God, and man of many hats and 2 nicknames, Brian Foster.
What's going on, Dre? And yeah, we are into the playoffs now. We are taping on April 17th, so some series have 2 games in the books. Some are playing their second game tonight as we tape, and there's a lot of playoff action.
All right, well, the good news is, in terms of these series that are going on, I think one is probably safe. Let's tempt fate. The Toronto Raptors are playing the Washington Wizards after a kind of a weird-ish first game where it was probably closer than it had any reason being. Toronto Raptors pulled it out. Looks like they're going to go up 2-0. The Boston Celtics-Milwaukee Bucks series is going on as we're speaking. It's anyone's game. The Celtics are only up by 9 at the half. I know that's actually a lot, but I'm going to stay kind of optimistic. And later on tonight, the New Orleans Pelicans are playing the Portland Trailblazers. So, basic plan for tonight, we are going to we're going to run down the playoffs. We'll see how much time we spend on each series. Brian is a Golden State Warriors fan, so we'll see what happens there. Then we're going to talk about some pay raises coming for the NBA G League, because it was kind of egg on their face that they were playing players to play fake basketball, esports basketball, more than they were playing their minor league system. We're going to talk about jersey sales, tanking, 538, and then some more tangents that I might have. All right, so let's dive into the meat and potatoes of the playoffs. Brian, I know the series you want to talk about. The Golden State San Antonio Spurs. The tweet I had about this is I said this is the playoff series we all wanted a few years ago that we didn't get in that playoffs where they were both above 10 SRS teams. As a reminder, SRS is strength of schedule adjusted point margin per 100 possessions. So above 10 means basically this team against an average team in a neutral court would be expected to win by 10 points on average. That's very good. Doesn't happen very often. Both the Spurs and the Warriors did that a few seasons back, and yet neither one of them won an NBA title. That honor went to Cleveland. But so they're finally back against each other. Of course, they're playing without regular season MVP Steph Curry and finals MVP Kawhi Leonard, and it's gone 2-0 to the Golden State Warriors. I think it's been a shellacking, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it has. So it's so funny. So last week we were doing our playoff preview show or whatever you want to call it, and we talked about how hard it is to predict things, and then sure enough, less than a week later, things are looking much different in this series than they did right before it began.
Very just important point. And I think in terms of playoffs, this is widely important. And I'll shout out a Bill Simmons podcast article, something from years ago. Which players are playing in the playoffs matters a great, great deal. And so last week when we were talking incorrect odds, I think you copied some odds onto the script, and I think they had action. So like how many people were betting on each side, which I misinterpreted as who was the favorite. And so we kind of we're talking about who favorites were. And as we were going, I was like, I don't think that's right. But the Spurs and Warriors, I think we thought Vegas liked it as like a coin flip. But a huge part of that is we thought Kawhi was going to be back. And we actually heard that. Like you said, people were expecting us. They hadn't heard anything.
Yeah, last week rumor was he was going to play, but now it seems like he's never going to play at all this playoffs.
I want to talk him more, but let's push him to the end of this segment. But I was just going to say, we were going off of that expectation. That doesn't happen. Of course, that's a completely different series, right? If you take the Spurs with Kawhi versus that's a hugely different series. Even the Warriors, where, people are prognosticating them at 8% to win the NBA Finals, without knowing the status of Steph Curry's health, and if you're not the team doctor for the Warriors who's allowed to be honest, because don't forget, the Warriors, you guys have done so well that you're able to forget some honestly hilarious kerfuffles in the same management. But I believe with Andrew Bogut a few years back, right, they were basically like, he's healthy, he's fine. They said that for a few weeks, and they're like, he's shut down for the season. So
yeah.
You're not even hearing things secondhand, even hearing Woj bombs or whatever. We don't know the status of Steph Curry's health. We don't know the status of Kawhi's health. An MVP player can literally dictate your odds in the playoffs. So it's not surprising, honestly, that the Spurs are getting shellacked like that. I give major credit. I forget the exact quote, but Greg Popovich was saying something. I'm trying to remember the exact player he was talking about on his team, but they were like, "What happened?" Classic Pop. He's like, "We got outplayed." And then they said, any plans, and one of his players, like it might have been PJ Tucker or someone else.
Oh, you're talking about, is he going to grow 6 inches or whatever?
Do you remember the player?
That was Danny Green, I think.
Danny Green. He was like, yeah, for next series, we're going to ask Danny Green to grow 4 or 5 inches, ask him to, run faster, jump higher, and then also ask Kevin Durant not to play as well. That was after game 1 where they got shellacked. And then spoiler alert for those of you that haven't caught up on game 2, Kevin Durant kept playing really well in game 2, and they beat him soundly. So, I mean, even no matter what you believe the true odds for the rest of the series, it is really hard if you are not the better team and are down 2-0 in the playoffs. And you know what? I was getting a chuckle at the beginning of the playoffs, Brian, at the number of people kind of bashing Kevin Durant. It's kind of a popular thing, saying this is Steph Curry's team. Kevin Durant's not as good, blah, 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 blah. You've got an MVP and finals MVP player on your squad, and he's playing really well in the playoffs. So I think you're allowed to be in a good mood about that.
Yeah, so again, going back to last week, and I was a little dubious on the Warriors. I thought the Spurs did have a decent chance to beat them. And I think, of course, now the Spurs still could win. They could take 4 out of the next 6 games, or that's the wrong math, but you know what I mean. Anyway, the point is, it's looking great for the Warriors right now, and it wasn't last week. So what has changed? What are the 2 big things that I've identified for this series of difference? First, you were just talking about the health. We knew Curry was going to be out. That was a disaster for the Warriors. We thought Leonard might play, but now he's not. Huge disaster for the Spurs. But another big factor is if you look at the Warriors during their no Curry period of time towards the end of the season, a big difference in the various games during that time is Andre Iguodala playing or not. And he came back, and not only did he play, he started at point guard for Curry and played a lot of minutes. So that Iguodala's health, Curry's health, Leonard's health, big story in the series. It's a little bit different from last week.
I got to keep shouting out Arturo's. It's not even that much of a tinfoil hat. I think it might even be kind of a wink, nudge, nudge thing. They don't do drug testing during playoffs. And this is also important. The playoffs, unlike the regular season, the team you're playing. There is guaranteed rest between each game, and there's guaranteed rest before the start. So it's like, your players are going to be, even if you don't think there's anything illicit going on. So let's leave that off the table. Let's just say there's no drug testing, but let's just say your players are going to be in peak physical health for the playoffs. So even a couple players, Derrick Rose, not good, but the best we've seen him in a while. Dwayne Wade's playing really well. Andre Iguodala's playing really well. You've got some older beat up players that seem like at the end of the regular season are kind of falling apart that have looked a little better to start the playoffs.
Yeah, and then the second big thing that I was very sketchy on to end the season for the Warriors was basically Steve Kerr and his lineups. Steve Kerr does seem like a pretty good coach earlier in his career. Obviously, his record is amazing, and that's based mostly on how good his players are. But, we question his lineups. Why is Nick Young getting so many minutes? Why is he in the game in crunch time playing forward and not even guard in small ball lineups? Why are certain players not getting enough minutes that are really good? And he just had a huge change in his lineups for these 2 games versus the regular season. In addition to Iguodala being in the starting lineup, he put McGee in there. And so that's a huge team. Everyone is 6'7" or taller. Both of their guards are 6'7" or taller.
Interesting.
I guess Draymond Green is a little shorter than that, but he doesn't play that big, right? He plays very big. Kevin Durant and JaVale McGee are both 7 feet tall. And then Kevon Looney, who also is 6'9" and is an excellent rebounder and rim defender, has been one of the first players off the bench. Quinn Cook, who's very small, has minutes reduced. Nick Young has only played when the game's been out of touch. He has not played in real minutes at all.
2 guys that are huge on that point. Quinn Cook, Sean Livingston, Nick Young, so I guess I'll say 3. Those 3 have combined for, in 2 games, 48 minutes. Right. Or actually, no, it's a little higher. I guess Quinn Cook's averaging 21.5, which is higher than I'd like, but let's be fair. That's going to come out of Curry when he comes back. But you're right. Like Livingston's at 19 minutes a game. Nick Young's at 6 minutes a game. That's kind of huge. Those 2 players we identified before the series was going on. We were saying Nick Young and Sean Livingston were 6th and 7th in terms of minutes played on per game on the Warriors. And we're like, that's not a good thing. These 2 guys are not good. So for the playoff rotation, you're right. And it's, we love JaVale McGee. So him actually getting 17 and a half minutes a game is good.
And he's been great. He's been great. Good against LaMarcus Aldridge.
The game, yeah, that's good stuff as well.
So yeah, I mean that's a huge change too. Like which players play. I mean he hasn't been perfect, right? You know, Jordan Bell and Zaza Pachulia aren't playing at all really. But you only have so many minutes and you have so many good big guys, and the fact that they're playing these big lineups. And let me bring up this tweet from Anthony Slater to emphasize this. And he is a beat writer for the Warriors. Follow him at Anthony V. Slater. Warriors out-rebounding Spurs 90-65 through 2 games. That is a crushing on the boards. And when you have good big players like the Warriors, that's what you should be doing. You should be playing a lot of minutes, crushing the other team on the board, and they're winning pretty easily through 2 games.
Let's see. Let me take a look at just the playoff rundown. So assuming everything goes well for you, the next series, this might actually be good news in terms of small ball versus big ball. I don't think there is a risk in this playoffs of ever having a matchup where the Warriors are convinced they should go small ball. Because regardless of who comes out of the 3 versus 6 seed, that's the Trailblazers versus the Pelicans, that's Anthony Davis or Nurkic. There's no way you're playing small against either of those.
I think they would be tempted to go small against Portland.
Interesting.
But I hope not.
I'm saying is it looks like the most likely outcome is Pelicans, Trailblazers, who knows at this point, in the next round, and then the Rockets in the next round. And then I'm just going to say it. I'm saying 76ers to the finals, man. I'm okay with it. Basically, all of those teams have one or more very dominant bigs, and there is no reason for the Warriors not to play legit center. If they are fooled into thinking they ever want to leave that mismatch. And in fact, by the way, some of my friends that are Bucks fans and myself included, like a very real problem with the Bucks is just like a lack of 2 decent bigs. I'll give you John Henson. John Henson's very good, but like Thon Maker is just freaking terrible. They never liked playing Greg Monroe when he was here. They insist on not just getting another center, which is just baffling. And, you know, the Bucks kind of just get out rebounded. So the optimistic news for your Warriors, Brian, is provided JaVale McGee, Kevon Looney, maybe Jordan Bell. He's only at 4 minutes, but, you know, never know. As long as they can give like 48 minutes to those 3 players, and then, of course, you have some very good power forwards, David West, Draymond Green, Kevin Durant, I'm okay counting that category, you're in good shape. So it's just a matter of like your team can't afford to think that Sean Livingston and Nick Young deserve major minutes against good competitors. And so hopefully you stay in that boat throughout the rest of the series.
So what Steve Kerr has been saying basically is we started this big lineup because we think it's our best defensive lineup. And I think he considers Sean Livingston to be a really good defensive player, even though, like you said, his offense is a little sketchy. So I think that's why Livingston's going to continue to get minutes, and that's not the end of the world. He's not going to kill you. I was a little worried about their shot selection towards the end of the season too, but their offenses look great. They're passing a lot. They have 120 O rating through 2 games. That's the highest of any team. Very small sample size, obviously, but, you know, that's a good sign for them.
That's the rules on the play. I mean, let's just give the standard disclaimer we're going to give on any playoff analysis, so that's here till the end of the playoffs. None of this means a damn thing. It can't.
That's right.
In a best-of-7 series, 1 or 2 players goes off. I mean, we think that Klay Thompson is one of the greatest shooters ever. We were talking about this pre-show, Brian. Like, if he could, for how tall he is, the fact that he can't rebound is just annoyingly baffling. If this was baseball and he was a designated hitter, he'd be one of the greatest hitters in the league. And I mean, he is one of the great, like the top scorers in the NBA right now. It's just it's slightly frustrating. I mean, if you think he's good at defense, which many people say, we basically think he's a above average to good player. But if he could just do a few more things, he'd go from that above average to good to great. And so that's slightly frustrating. But no, he's an amazing offensive player, but you know, he can go off for a few games. So none of this means a damn thing, but it is fun. I'm going to give a last note because we can't avoid it because of what we just said. We were expecting Kawhi to play kind of. I mean, I wasn't. Let's be clear. If you listen to like last week's show, I'm like shocked when you tell me you think he's going to play and he ends up not playing. There's a lot of speculation going on, and who knows is all I can say. We can reiterate some points we've made. It seems somewhat frustrating, the paternalism that exists in a lot of American sports, primarily football and basketball. And let's just go with race, Brian. This week, a story that went viral was this woman was sitting at Starbucks. Two African American men came in. Basically, we're just trying to sit and not eat anything, and they were told, hey, you're not allowed to be in here without ordering anything. They were waiting for a friend. They kept waiting. The cops got called on them. I believe they were in jail till 1:30 a.m. in the morning. And there is this very real odd sense. Like I feel it's just important to keep pointing it out because the United States is a weird place, especially living in like Wisconsin, which is a weird state, which is a lot of nice, friendly people, but still has a problem with race. The example I keep bringing back, I forget the player specifically, but it was like Whitefish Bay or White Harbor Bay out here, I think it's called. A Milwaukee Bucks player went to a jewelry store to buy some jewelry. They saw him coming. They locked the door and called the cops on him. So, and so all we're noting is that those are the more, actually, it's funny to say they're not the more, they're like the middle of the road examples. Obviously, the most egregious example is, the amount of times African Americans are like shot by the police. Yeah, we're going there. That's right. That's this show. But anyway, getting back to basketball, the point being this weird paternalism of why don't these players just shut up and do what they're told? Earlier this year, LeBron James, I think was it by a Fox correspondent, was told, just shut up and play ball, shut up and dribble or something to that effect.
Right.
So with Kawhi, I'm always going to be on his side and saying we don't know the full story. Anything that's coming out, especially from an organization that has traditionally been as professional as the Spurs, any leaks we are hearing, that's not the MO for that team. Kawhi hasn't really said anything, so we don't know what's going on. It does seem like it's getting testy because I think Tony Parker made a jab at him, and I think there's a belief. It's very subtweety. I got to give it to Greg Popovich, Brian. Like Greg Popovich was complimenting LaMarcus Aldridge, but he was doing it, in that way where you say, unlike some other people, LaMarcus Aldridge does this, and he was saying, does it all, plays through whatever. So it is getting testy there, but the basic points I'll give you, Kawhi won 2 Defensive Player of the Year awards in that city. He won a Finals MVP. My general belief is if a player wins a Finals MVP for your squad, like their name goes in the rafters no matter what, unless they Dre Tangent that I didn't even put on the script, number 1, Brian. This always freaking comes up in wrestling, but no Chris Benoit will never go into a Hall of Fame, and he has no reason going into any Hall of Fame. For those of you that don't know, Chris Benoit is a famous professional wrestler who ended his life tragically in a murder-suicide with his wife and kids. So obviously that end of his legacy is horrible, terrible, tragic. That off-the-field issue is big enough to say we don't need to, even if he had a great wrestling career, we don't need to memorialize him forever. Like Hollywood could take an example from that. Just because you were really good at wrestling or making a movie doesn't mean we have to give you awards. Take that in mind. So, the same point, like as long as Kawhi doesn't do anything horrible off the field, the Spurs should retire his jersey, even if it ends badly like this. It's one of my beliefs. Horace Grant is one of the most snubbed players in NBA history. His name belongs in the rafter for the Bulls. And they're just kind of, mad he left to chase a title with Orlando.
Well, yeah, and let's add one thing about Chris Benoit. The reason it's thought he did that murder-suicide is he had CTE from wrestling, right, from hitting his head so many times. So, so that probably happened to him due to his wrestling career, right?
That's the belief, but I mean, it is fair enough to say you cannot separate this horrible off the field, right, whatever you want to call it, event from his legacy, and It's okay if you don't want to memorialize that. And I had one other comment on that, but here's what it was. There was like a top 5 at like Kayfabe Wrestling or one of those sites that does like behind the scenes wrestling shoots. Shoot, for those that don't know in wrestling terms, is, wrestling is scripted, it's fake, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But there's a lot of behind the scenes drama. So a shoot is when a performer, an in-ring announcer, whatever, tells the real behind the scenes story. So it's like you were seeing this on the screen. Here's what was going on behind the scenes. There was like a top 5 most hated people in wrestling, and he came number 2 on that list. And number 1 was like Vince Russo. And I was like, how the hell? I don't care how bad Vince Russo, he was a famous wrestling writer who scripted a lot of both famous storylines in wrestling and then infamous ones and probably helped hurt the WWE, WCW, and TNA. So good on him. I'm like, how on earth is that more hated than, a murder? So fans are weird, Brian. Fans are weird. Let's. I have no subtle jumping off point to the process. Last point is just thoughts are with Kawhi. Whatever he wants to do, we're basically on his side because no matter how you believe he is acting, there is a very weird component of basketball in particular, which is go where we tell you, do what you're told. And we're even seeing Popovich start to break in that direction. And I'm like, I'm not with it. Whatever Kawhi wants to do for his brand, he can do for his brand. And the fact that San Antonio got him on a rookie contract, which means I think they paid him like $5 million for one of his Defensive Player of the Year seasons. They got their money's worth. So anyway, speaking of underpaid rookie assets, Philadelphia, Miami. You said surprisingly tied at 1-1. Here's something I wasn't aware of, but started showing up on my feed, and I don't know their names, so I apologize. But Philadelphia and Miami, as of this recording, are tied 1-1. Philadelphia came out with a very resounding Game 1 victory. I think he didn't get a triple-double, so we know it doesn't matter, but I think Ben Simmons had like a 14-9-12 first game. It was amazing. I guess the referees that refed Game 2 are kind of notorious, and many people were saying that Philadelphia wasn't going to win ahead of time. And we
Was it Tony Brothers and Scott Foster? Those are the two people usually target.
Yes, and I was going to say, I don't know well enough. I mean, I have not done referee analytics well enough to know this. A lot of the ones I know are anecdotal, like as a Nuggets fan, everybody would say Violet Palmer always had it in for the Nuggets. It's hard to know, obviously, although most of it's been proven to be like just made up bullshit. But like Tim Donaghy, when he released his book, said, various refs had it in for various players. So who knows there that, it was an up and down game, but they're tied at 1-1. They still don't have Joel Embiid. If Joel Embiid comes back, I'm going to keep dropping my estimate because I think I've said 80% before. If he comes back 50% healthy, this is still my favorite team to make it all the way to the finals, as you heard in the first segment. I want to give a brief Philadelphia-related tangent about the process because I'm seeing a lot of vindication for that, and I wanted to crystallize my thoughts on this because we are, as I told Sam Hinkie in person, I said I'm one of his biggest fans and biggest critics, and his response was he noticed, which I thought was funny. But our general point on tanking for the 76ers is we said, let's just note they lost 4 seasons, right? They were out of the playoffs, one of the worst teams in the league. That's 4 seasons they're never getting back. No matter what they do, those 4 seasons are gone. That's 4 seasons of season ticket holders, of fans of the 76ers, not seeing playoff basketball, not even seeing particularly competitive basketball, that are gone. It is a bizarre thing to me that people think that if you don't believe you're going to win a title, it is acceptable to just have a season of unwatchable basketball. That's the first one. The second one we said is even if they succeed in doing what they actually did, which is drafting, they had like a 50% hit rate, which is remarkable, which is you get multiple top 10 picks. You hope that a couple of them turn into stars and those stars propel you forward. And they basically have that kind of with Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons. Here is the key problem with the belief that it worked out. And so our thought was this process is going to take too long because you're already starting off negative 4 years, right? It took them 4 years to get to where they were. And we said rookies take a while to develop. So even if they get where they want to be by the end of those 4 seasons, it's probably going to take Ben Simmons a couple seasons to develop. It's probably going to take Joel Embiid a couple seasons to be fully healthy. Now, luck have it, he was pretty much healthy until Markelle Fultz elbowed him in the eye, which is what happened. And Ben Simmons is the most amazing rookie on a competitive team since Tim Duncan. He is, I believe, if you go to the Boxscore Geeks, Brian, I believe he is the top point guard in the NBA at 16 wins produced. We would have thought, as a rookie, if Ben Simmons, coming back from an injury, as a rookie, if he had put up 6 to 8 wins, now, by the way, like an average player would be, like an average starter would be worth about 6 wins. So, 8 wins would be Ben Simmons as a rookie coming in and being a good player. We were like, if he does that, that is remarkable. He came in 16 wins. So this team won 52 games. Those 16 wins, that's like 8 beyond what we were thinking as like the good case scenario. And then as you were very prone to note at the beginning of the season, Brian, we still got a credit for, Robert Covington's season this year came out of nowhere. If you look at his age curve, you might have expected progression. He was playing like star level to start the season, and that was actually really crucial because Covington was playing star level while Simmons was kind of ramping up and Embiid was returning. Embiid didn't play back-to-backs for a while. So Covington, not only was Covington hot, he was hot at the right time. So essentially, when people are like, the process worked, we just kind of tilt our head and go, We didn't like this plan because we thought it was going to take like 7 to 8 years, which was unacceptable. Yeah, it's taking 5 seasons is what it looks like. But please recognize that Ben Simmons is a once-in-a-generation talent. The last rookie that was this good, and by the way, like Karl Anthony Towns was a fantastic rookie, not at this level. The last rookie this good was basically Chris Paul, and that was in 2006. That was 12 seasons ago. So I don't like the idea of people saying this plan worked because you lucked into a once-in-a-generation player. It's kind of the same as saying the Cavaliers tanking plan, and they were tanking too because they wound up with 3 number 1 picks in 4 years.
Right.
They lucked
Dan Gilbert, remember he sent his young son to go to the lottery to pick it out, and he was like the lucky ball picker or whatever. I don't know if you remember that, but...
Yeah, I do not remember that, but that sounds like what he would do, and then he like wrote the pick in Comic Sans, I'm sure.
Exactly.
But they lucked into like the Los Angeles Clippers pick turning into Kyrie Irving. So like the Cavaliers, right? They lucked into LeBron James and Kevin Love coming back because, for instance, Andrew Wiggins was terrible. They drafted Anthony Bennett, who was terrible. They got Kyrie Irving, but Kyrie Irving wasn't their pick. So like this team that tanked, none of their players turned out well, but they lucked into a finals, and it was just because of circumstance. And I'm arguing the 76ers, if you told me you thought Ben Simmons was going to be a great rookie, we're on board. We like when people were saying Ben Simmons wasn't the consensus number 1 pick, and there are people like, if you're bored, go back in time, Wayback Machine, or go through the news archives. If you're really old school, you can probably do microfiche at the library. There were people that are like, Ben Simmons might not be the best fit on that team because they already got Jahlil Okafor and Joel Embiid, or Ben Simmons might not be the number 1 pick. They might want to go for Lonzo Ball or whatever. It's like there was a point where people didn't realize how good. It wasn't Lonzo Ball. Who was the number 2? Was D'Angelo Russell? I think it was D'Angelo Russell, right? That was the number.
Yeah, he was number 2 in some draft. I don't remember which one.
Yeah, certain that was the draft. I'll look it up in just a second. But I'm just saying, when your team lucks into a once-in-a-generation talent, and I mentioned, I'm giving a throwback to one of Patrick's old things, Brian. Patrick has this idea for like the ladder to success. I think he like jokingly said it, and I thought it was hilarious and said, it's a fantastic like infomercial talk. So Patrick's like ladder to success is like, if you're a team in the NBA and you want to improve, it's not as simple as like a treadmill. It's a ladder where you basically have to go up rungs, where you could kind of view like every 5 or 10 every 5 or 10 wins as a rung. And the nice part about the NBA is a lot of that lucks into players, right? You need to get 2 like good productive veterans, or you need to get a star player, or you need a player to progress, right? All of these rungs. Ben Simmons like jumped a rung and a half on his own this season, is my point. So even when we're on Team 76ers, we are like the biggest 76ers fans right now, right? I'm not intentionally wearing 76ers colors, but it worked out that way. We're the biggest 76ers fans right now. Even we're honest in saying, like, this is something you've done very well, Brian, when you talk these things. It's kind of like looking at this probabilistically. If you had kind of charted a distribution of probable outcomes for the 76ers, given how they ended last season, the players on their roster this season, and the standard age progression curves, rookie progression curves, you would have said 45 was an optimistic bet. And Covington and Simmons so vastly overperformed what any logical model would have them at. That's why they're a contender this season. And we hate being results oriented. We actually get to use a pun here, Brian, like being process oriented. You got to look at the process, look at what you would expect. And so for the 76ers, even though we're on Team 76ers, even though I'm on team like, I wish Hinkie had been in control of this draft because he would have done way better than turning 2 draft picks into Markelle Fultz and picking up J.J. Redick and Amir Johnson. I thought he might have done those 2 moves. I don't know. Even though I'm on team that, I just want that out there. And I still think they're going to be fine for the rest of the series. They probably should have won game 2, but, maybe better rest. Joel Embiid coming back healthy. That'll be good.
So if you look at it this way with the 76ers, Dre, if you give them the complete benefit of the doubt that they are really good at, player analysis, both regimes, Hinkie and the Colangelos, you say, okay, we drafted Ben Simmons and, even though he was hurt, we saw him practice or whatever, play internally. We already know he's a big stud once we took him in 2016. Let's pretend they knew that right from the beginning. They should have tried to win in 2016 then, or later that fall, instead of tanking further, right? They should have been, all right, we've got our guy. It's time to flip the switch and start winning. but they didn't. They tanked for another season. So
it's arguable, right? I mean, Ben Simmons was playing, or not Ben Simmons, Joel Embiid was playing very well, and they got shut down for the rest of the season. Who knows if they were, it's always hard to know if a team's tanking or just sucks. So it is kind of, yeah, I think
I'm just saying they should have gone for that Amir Johnson, JJ Redick moves. They could have done those then, but they didn't, right? They kept stripping salary and, not bring in veterans. So,
well, I mean, I will stress this just last point before we go on to whatever our next series is. I do legitimately hate the take that being in the playoffs and even not going anywhere is worse than staying at home. I'm always baffled by this take of, well, you're not going to contend, so why even bother? That is not how sports works, and that is not how anybody who is a fan of the NBA should think. Because if you don't have one of the top 10 players in the NBA, you're not competing for a title. And if you have belief, we can tell you at the beginning of the season if you're one of those teams, probably. Like, I can go like, if one of your rookies doesn't turn around, you have no shot at a title this season. I can say that to 20 teams in the NBA to start the season, no problem. And
Dre, actually, this is a good time to sneak in the tanking topic on the script.
Oh yeah. Let's hop to tank. So this was fascinating. You're not a Black Mirror fan, but there is like,
I just haven't watched it. I bet I would be a fan.
Yeah,
though.
Right. But like in the future, they have these like things that let you kind of see augmented reality. And one of the things you can do is like you can be blocked or block out people from your reality, like with how if you can see them or not. So Wojnarowski, I'm kind of like a half second behind Woj bombs and stuff because he's blocked me on Twitter. But I still see all the news because people responded almost immediately. But you said on a Wojnarowski podcast, you say boo tanking, but Wojnarowski on a podcast basically says, in an anecdotal manner, sure, tanking is very much alive and real.
Yeah, so what he said is basically owners he talks to are getting mad at their coaches for winning late in the season, for winning games. And that is just absurd. So someone posted this on Twitter. People on Twitter are speculating it's the Hawks because they beat a few good teams at the end of the year when they were out of the playoffs already.
They beat the Nuggets who missed the playoffs by a game. So thank you for that.
So, yeah, I mean, you should just try to win. So here's what I always say about this, Dre. The owners and the GMs are selling their fans a bill of goods with tanking. It's not as effective to go all the way down to the basement before you try to climb back up. You should keep climbing that ladder, like Patrick said. And I cannot believe these, billionaire owners have tricked their fans into thinking their team should intentionally lose. It's absurd.
But so here's the thing: when you say trick their fans, they haven't, because it doesn't work. That again. I'm not going to grab it; it's too far away in the bookshelf. But Wages of Wins, that one of the first takes that they had, they looked at stadium attendance. That was actually their first set of big stories. So, for instance, one of the big stories is people think lockouts and strikes have a big impact on demand. They don't. What they do have an impact on is you're negotiating TV deals. So don't strike or lock out if you're negotiating a new TV deal. But he talks about what drives attendance to games, and really it's winning. So fans aren't fooled. If I tell, I think a few years ago the Minnesota Timberwolves said we're not competing this year, and this was when they had freaking Kevin Love and I think Gorgie Jang before he got too super injured, and they were like, we have Kevin Love, you have Kevin Love, you can compete. The Amir Johnson, JJ Redick point, it's like shell out for a few decent veterans and you can actually be a contender. So that being said, they sell this bill of goods, but fans don't buy it. They don't show up for games. Your home team, which is what drives your revenue for stadium attendance, does not show up to a losing squad. So it is kind of funny when you're saying the bill of goods. All that really happens with tanking is I think the bill of goods that's being sold and the people that are fooled, and this is kind of frustrating, it's middle management. A GM can tell their owner, I have a plan, it's to lose, don't worry about it. And the good news with that is, right, they're like one of three scenarios. One is you're a bad team and you can't win anyway. So no matter what you do, you're going to do bad, and your boss is probably going to be mad at you for that. So if you say you're tanking, you're saying you're doing it on purpose and they're fine. The other option is you say you're a bad team, but you're secretly a good team. You say you're tanking, and if you outperform, this is what actually happened in Toronto, allegedly, where they started outperforming what they expected because it turns out they don't know how to evaluate player evaluation. So like getting rid of Andrea Bargnani and Kyle Lowry and giving more minutes, or not Kyle Lowry, Andrea Bargnani, Rudy Gay, giving giving more minutes to Kyle Lowry was enough to turn them into a better team. That happens, then your owner's pleasantly surprised because you told them we're going to suck this year. So you're playing better. You make the playoffs. Huzzah. You're ahead of schedule. Or like the third is like you're like somewhere in the middle, but you say you're bad. And then you actually do what Wojnarowski is saying, right? You're a 40-win team, but you tilt the other way. And now now there's no like risk of over expectation because that's one of our normal notes. It's a study that's been on the back burner for me forever, but this idea. If you look at a team going into the playoffs, and we look at SRS a lot because what's telling is playoff seeding does not always align with reality. For instance, the Utah Jazz, on paper, are a better team, I believe, than the Oklahoma City Thunder. Is that right? I think their SRS is better.
It's pretty close. Both those teams are solid. Let's bring it up here.
Okay, well,
the point stands.
But there are times in the playoffs. One of my favorite historical stories that is going to land on no one because it's this old. The Philadelphia 76ers were upset in the playoffs in the NBA Finals by the Portland Trail Blazers. And what's more telling is the Portland Trail Blazers went up 2-0. But on paper, the Portland Trail Blazers are a better team. People just had a misconception, right? The Philadelphia 76ers had Dr. J, and I think they had more wins. So it's like we can say there are oftentimes in the playoffs, and especially when you start drilling down to playoff rotation, right? Our point with the Toronto Raptors is they are a really good team SRS-wise, but they are a deep team. So when they start shortening their benches and their opponents start shortening their benches, they might not actually even be the favorites, although out east against anybody but the 76ers. So that being said, when teams underperform expectations, but their expectations might be flawed, we know this. Owners and management doesn't always know how to set things. That's when people freak out. That's when people get fired. So when you intentionally don't even make the playoffs, there's no risk of you being in danger of your GM saying, we should have been contending. What the hell happened? So the bill of goods being sold is from a GM to an owner, and that works, which is annoying. And more frustratingly, we keep pointing this out. The NBA sets the rules. So the Atlanta Hawks point. The Atlanta Hawks are out of the playoffs, and the Atlanta Hawks are a sucky team. And you even said on the road. So let's point out a few things together. You don't really make revenue from road games. So there's not an incentive to like outperform. You don't have a bunch of Hawks fans traveling around the city to watch the country to watch the Hawks play, right? You get a slightly better draft pick if you do worse, and you're already not in the playoffs. No one's shocked. So it's like you can't fault them. They've set up the incentive, right? They've set up the incentive to say, if you know you're not making the playoffs after the All-Star break, and you're not, and you are so far removed from the playoffs, like there might be a hope of the trade deadline, right? Let's say you're like 10 games out of the playoffs, and at the trade deadline, you're like, I'm going to trade for Dikembe Mutombo and become a contender. That example didn't work that well because the 76ers were a good team before him and turned into a great team after him. But let's say the Hawks were like 10 games out of the playoffs, trade deadline comes up, and for whatever reason, like Nikola Jokic is on the board, and they get Nikola Jokic, and now they can make a push. The trade deadline's over, the All-Star break's over, you have no hope of the playoffs. The rules say you should tank. The rules in that specific scenario and on the road say don't do anything. Like at home, you might want to play a little better for your fans, so your fans show up. Like you don't want to bench the stars because maybe a few fans want to show up to see someone on the Hawks play. But
Kent Bazemore. No, I don't.
Of course, the star. I was laughing at that, by the way. There was like an ad for some tech company that said like NBA star Willie Cauley-Stein, and I was like, I respect what you're trying to do, but slow your roll on calling Willie Cauley-Stein a star. But yeah, like so the rules incentivize. So we can't even be mad at them when Wojnarowski is saying this. I can't be mad because the NBA incentivizes this. And we keep saying this. As long as the NBA incentivizes this behavior, even if it's irrational behavior, it's going to keep happening. So it's kind of like the water is wet point.
Well, and I think everyone just kind of agrees tanking is the best thing ever. I think it's not just the GMs. I think the owners are on board. I think the media is on board. I think all the fans are too, if you go on Reddit and Twitter. And
yeah, this is very much... I think
everyone is into tanking.
Well, this is very much a go for it and fourth down. The data says, the analytics say, the logic says, in most cases, NFL teams should be going for it on fourth down. Mathematically, it is the most positive EV.
Yeah.
They've automated it. Like, you can be an NFL coach.
Brian Burke wrote this Twitter bot, NYT fourth down bot. Yeah.
So that's Brian Burke. Of course, it's Brian Burke. He's amazing. You could just, if you're an NFL head coach, you can just open Twitter and see what Twitter says. And it's going to tell you the right maneuver. Like, we're down to that point. but they still don't because they know if they miss, they're going to get yelled at. And tanking is the very same model. If I tank, I'm not going to get yelled at. And then I can lie about any player in the draft, right? That's what our point about Simmons is. Simmons is playing like every freaking draft pick that every owner gets that they're trying to sell their team. This Donovan Mitchell is going to be the next Michael Jordan. No, he's not. I'm going to laugh so hard when he does, Brian. It's going to be freaking hilarious. But that's the point. They can sell this and it works, and it's conventional wisdom that's accepted. And that's our wheelhouse where we go. Sports has a lot of conventional wisdom. Sports, compared to a lot of other very hard problems, has concrete rules and concrete math that you can break down. And we've crunched the numbers, and unless something major changes, you like to always say we're Bayesian on this podcast, which for the most part we are. If you're a Bayesian scientist in the NBA, relying on the draft is just a stupid strategy. But the NBA is foolish too, because like I said, if I was a team that, got unlucky, let's say Kawhi goes down injured, and let's say LaMarcus Aldridge goes down. Let's say like Kawhi goes down injured early in the season for the Spurs, and then let's say like Pau Gasol and LaMarcus Aldridge, cool runnings it, they run into each other. They're out for the full season, and I'm not going to make the playoffs. I'm pretty certain the difference I've said I would do is instead of just resting my stars, what I would start doing is I would start getting a lot of 10-day contracts and start basically using the end of the season as a tryout for hidden gems for Jeremy Lin-like players. I would be doing that, but I would tank, and the NBA rules say that's okay because your fans know you're not making the playoffs. You're not making the playoffs, and the NBA is going to give you a better asset. The other thing that would probably happen, Brian, is if I lucked into a top 5 pick, I'm going to do what the Boston Celtics did, where they were able to trade. They were basically able to for a year in the future. That's what you can do. You can flip a top 5 pick for a top 5 pick in the future and an asset, probably.
Maybe I'm not cynical enough, Dre, but to answer your question, kind of like what should the GM actually do when talking to the owner? I think I would be honest if, based on my own business experience, right? You say, look, we have the talent of a 30-win team, but if we can overachieve and we have, age curve stuff goes well, maybe we can get up to 35 or 40. But if players get injured, maybe, it's going to go down to 20 and just say, look, this is how talented we are, but we're still going to try to win,
Yeah.
It might not work, but we're going to try.
And what bugs me too, I said from a Bayesian perspective, the New York Knicks, now again, this was in 1999, but that's less than 20 years ago, managed to make the NBA Finals as a number 8 seed. The Portland Trail Blazers got the Golden State, they should have won the finals, but didn't, Golden State Warriors, to 6 games in the second round. When people say the following statement, I saw something about this about the Timberwolves. They said the Timberwolves made the playoffs for the first time in 14 years. And people are like, people are all happy they made the playoffs for the first time in 14 years, but their odds of winning a title this season are the same as those 14 seasons. No, they're not. They're significantly better. It is impossible to make the finals if you are not in the playoffs. A few key injuries to players, and I've noted this, like a number 8 seed upsetting a number 1 seed since we went to the best of 7 first round has happened 3 times. So that's to just that point. A key injury to the other team means you can go on to another round, possibly more. The Denver Nuggets, who were the first number 8 seed upseed, I believe took the Utah Jazz to 7 games. They almost advanced to the conference final. So it's like, it is, once you make the playoffs, anything is possible. And it bugs me that people, like, to your exact point about being honest, I can say, look, our odds of making the finals are 2%. Or actually I can throw my hands up and go, who knows? I'd place them at about 2%. But if we get to the playoffs, there's a chance. And if we don't get to the playoffs, it's 0. And fans that just, we've known this from books like Thinking Fast and Slow, where how you present data to people are risk averse. So if you say you can win $10, they're more likely to do it than if we say you could lose $1. That's NBA for us, where a lot of this is a probabilistic distribution based on a Bayesian model. That's how you should view it as a GM or an owner. Yeah. And we just get frustrated with how conventional wisdom shies away from that. And we know the reasons why, but that's where we're at. Let's go on to Toronto. Good news. Toronto did, in fact, win Game 2. Now, Toronto has a Golden State Warriors problem, in my opinion. Their best player, in my opinion, is Jonas Valanciunas. I think I said his name right. If not, apologies. This game,
I think it might be Jonas, but the Valanciunas is correct.
He got 19 points, 14 rebounds, 1 assist. Now, this is in 23 minutes of play. He is amazing. Number says their best player. Now let's give some credit where credit's due. A player that we basically said he's an above average player, but he really needs to figure something out. DeMar DeRozan really turned it up this season. The easy way he turned it up is he started taking threes. DeMar DeRozan went 14 for 23 and got 37 points. I like this team a lot, but as we were saying earlier, one of our problems with them is they are a deep team and they don't seem to they may not play their strongest players. So if Jonas Valanciunas doesn't get full minutes against like the 76ers, I think they might be a weaker squad. But it looks like they are going to take the Washington Wizards. As mentioned, the first game was a little closer than it maybe should have been. It's interesting. John Wall's playing pretty well, 9 for 17, 29 points, 9 assists, 4 turnovers, a little high, but he did get a block and 4 rebounds. Wow, this one's rough. I'm just looking at this game, Brian. This has to be boring to listen to. We've always hated Markieff Morris, so nothing new there. He didn't play very well. Marcin Gortat played downright terrible. The only kind of silver lining I'll give to this game in this series, my boy Ty Lawson actually had a semi-reasonable game, went 4 for 5 from 3, 8 assists, 1 turnover. But yeah, I think this is going to be over in favor of Toronto. There's no real surprises there. On paper, they are a significantly better team.
Yeah, and it looks like the Wizards went big-time small ball here, like Wall 32 minutes, Beal 25, Satoransky 15, and Lawson, like you said, 31. So, yeah, that's an easy way for Valanciunas to dominate you.
Yeah, and I mean, actually, a player that we kind of liked as a pickup for them was Ian Mahinmi. He only got 15 minutes, so I got 12 points in that. He was injured this season. I mean, I think Washington's a fascinating one, too, where people, I think, they've probably overpaid for some players, but they keep making the playoffs. It's like, even if you're a first-round exit a bunch, I'd prefer to be in that situation. Don't have too much more to say. Basically, I'd like to see if Kyle Lowry is going to show up to the playoffs. He hasn't been playing particularly great, though he did get 12 assists and 3 turnovers this game, so that's not bad, but 3 for 10
7 rebounds, too.
Wow. Yeah, if he can pick up his scoring, they're in good shape. We'll just have to see how that goes. All right, next series. This one hurts a little, maybe. The Boston Celtics look like they're going to win 2 in a row because with 12 minutes to go, they're up 90-75. Other teams, such as the Cavaliers, I might be inclined to say could give this up. But I'm going to stick with Coach Stevens. And I get to use one of my favorite lines that you've come up with, Brian. The Tony Snell does nothing well. And I get to introduce a subject I put on Twitter before the show, but I've had in the back of my head before. And I call it the Derek Fisher principle. So obviously back in the day, Shaq and Kobe were the big driving forces behind the three-peat Lakers. Obviously much more Shaq. That's Shaq. He's got the 3 finals MVPs. He's got the Triple Crown MVP, Finals MVP, All-Star MVP. Anybody that puts Kobe over Shaq on a list is an idiot that didn't watch the Lakers play. Yes, as the nerdy analytics guy, I get to use the did you watch, did you see freaking line to the mainstream folk. But the Derek Fisher principle is you don't need great players around a few stars, right? If you have Kobe Bryant and Shaq. But Derek Fisher was a perfectly competent point guard who actually had an amazing playoffs once, like did go off. But Derek Fisher was just like an average good guard throughout, I think, 4 or 5 of those Lakers finals with Kobe. And that's the point. If you have a star, if you luck into a Giannis, you don't necessarily need to get great players around him, but you need to get not shitty players. And here's where we're at. Now, admittedly, Eric Bledsoe's having a rough game, and that's going to hurt him. But let's look at this player. Tony Snell, in 20 minutes, has gone 1 for 3 for 2 points, 2 rebounds. As Brian has stated, Tony Snell does nothing well. This season, he vastly outperformed his historic seasons and was a below-average player. Tony Snell was a horrible pickup. We hated it at the time. And you've got Jabari Parker, who was, we thought was a Rookie of the Year candidate, left injured in his rookie season, and has just never been the same. And this team does not want to give up on him. In 10 minutes, 0 for 2 and 2 rebounds. I'll give some credit to Malcolm Brogdon. Jason Terry has no business getting minutes in any game ever, so I don't know why he's got 5 minutes in this game. And we'll give full credit. Chris Middleton's playing really well, which is good because he's been good the last couple of seasons, but has been rough this year. But, that is just not enough support around Giannis. And another point we've kind of made that you've been on board with, Brian, is like the small ball hate. John Henson's a good center. We like John Henson. They do not have a good center off the bench. I'm glad he's not getting minutes, but Thon Maker was downright terrible. The Bucks really needed to pick up another decent big. and Jabari Parker doesn't count. They needed someone else, and they haven't done that. And they just, they get out. I believe that's the case. They're at 31 rebounds. Interesting. Boston. They've actually out rebounded Boston. I wonder if that's Let's take a look. I got nothing, Brian. I don't know why they're out rebounding Boston, but Boston's beating them down. Anyway, they need a better big.
Eric Bledsoe's got 6 rebounds.
Yeah, Eric Bledsoe's got 6 rebounds, but I mean, like Al Horford's gone 6 for 9. Markieff Morris has gone 3 for 6. So it's like, this is so good. I'm sorry, Brian. So what I did say about this series, which is annoying, is I live in Wisconsin, and damn it, if the 76ers advance to the next round, which they probably are, and the Bucks advance the next round, I have to pay for at least 1 or 2 games. I have to, which means I have to drive to Milwaukee. It's an hour and a half away, Brian. I don't want to drive to Milwaukee, but I have to. Like, I just understand this as a sports fan. I refuse to not see if he's close enough by, which an hour and a half drive would count. If Chicago was in the playoffs, they might even count, right? So if Chicago's in the playoffs and they were playing the 76ers, I might have to drive out to Chicago to see a game. Luckily, there's no one else close. The Denver Nuggets, I might be going back in a month or two, so that might have counted, but luckily they're not in the playoffs. But I don't want to drive to Milwaukee to go see a playoff game, as fun as it would be, but I'll have to. So I'm actually on the side of Boston. And Greg Monroe, who Boston, if you remember, traded for Eric Bledsoe, was picked up by the Celtics. 4 for 5 on 10 points, 3 rebounds, and 1 assist in 12 minutes of play. I love it. If Greg Monroe is going to light up the Milwaukee Bucks, I love this series. So it's looking like this is probably going to go to Boston. I mean, this is another 2-0 lead, and though as mentioned, those are just kind of hard to come back from, especially if you think the team's a little better. I think the Bucks have a shot, but let's tie this to, I don't know if it's the next series on our list, but the Giannis Antetokounmpo point is very similar to LeBron James. Giannis is playing really well. He played really well in that game 1. Salt in the wound. He was ejected with a 6th foul, and upon review, they said it should have been a jump ball, and they lost by 2 in overtime. So, maybe they win that game if Giannis stays in the game. But Giannis is playing pretty darn well. Let's just do a quick snapshot of the game before we move on to the next one. So in like 33 minutes, I think he's at something. He is at 26 points, 7 rebounds, 3 assists, a steal, and a block. He's an amazing player. He does not have enough support. If Giannis playing well is not enough to overcome the Celtics, it's just not going to happen.
I got one last thing on Milwaukee, Dre, before we move on. Was it you that tweeted this out? Maybe it was Arturo or someone else, that the East actually had more 50-win teams this year than the West.
That was me. Yeah.
And my reply to that was, well, that's true, but let's be careful because they are well exceeding their Pythagorean wins in a lot of these cases.
Well, what was more remarkable to me about that is I just saw it and went, that's odd. And I started going back in time, and it has not happened since So the 2 important factions that are a big reason this is no longer the case, but were the case back in the day, that was the Jordan era Bulls. So, the Bulls post-Jordan era have just never even come close to that, excluding that brief window where like Joakim Noah, a few other players, I think Thabo Cephalosha, right? That 60-win season, pre-Derrick Rose injury. They had that brief spark, but never really even come close to it since. And the pre-Dolan Knicks. So those 2 franchises alone were enough to keep the East competitive. But I was just more amazed by the fact that the East had more 50-win teams than the West, and that has not happened in 21 years. So, wow. And I mean, let's throw a few other legacies in that same thing. That's like the same amount of time it's been since the San Antonio Spurs haven't had a 50-win season. That's like the same amount of time since Dirk Nowitzki was a rookie. So that was just remarkable. Yeah, you are right. Where the East, the bottom of the East is much, much weaker than the bottom of the West. As I think you noted last podcast, the Nuggets are the 11th best SRS team.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to get to. So I have this up right now. Nuggets are 11th in SRS, but did not make the playoffs. They're the best team to not make the playoffs. So who is below them that did make the playoffs, Dre? New Orleans Pelicans are 12th, the only West team worse than that made the playoffs, but they're just barely behind, right? Like 0.1 behind. That's basically a dead heat. However, there were 6 East teams worse than the Nuggets in SRS. The Pacers were ranked 13th. The Cavaliers were ranked 14th. They won 50 games at 14th ranked SRS. The Wizards, who we were saying before weren't very good, they were 15th. And then you can go down even further. The Heat were 17th in SRS. And then you go all the way down to 20th in the league, the Milwaukee Bucks. So not only were they the worst playoff team, they're one of the worst teams in the league this year.
And I quote Snotty Drippin on Twitter, who was saying this, and I'm in the same boat. Like, the strategy of the best player can usually win the playoffs. So like you need to be comparable, and we tend to see that, right? Finals are a battle of wills between star players, and that is the NBA. Usually multiple stars. But Giannis is easily the best player on the court right now, but I don't think he has enough support. And unfortunate rhyme. But let's tie that to another team. So I'm actually going to jump ahead. Yeah. I don't have a lot to say, but the Cavs Pacers, I don't know, Brian. We went into it, and I can pat myself a little bit because last week's show, my only line is I said this series is going to be closer than people think. But you've got playoff mode LeBron James. To remind people what that is LeBron James plays like 30 some odd minutes in the regular season, but traditionally is willing to play over 40 minutes in the playoffs. That is a huge advantage. So I went, the Pacers aren't that strong. The Cavaliers have playoff mode LeBron James. This is going to be a closer series than people think, but I think it goes to the Cavs. The Cavs got wrecked. And more importantly, the Cavs got wrecked with LeBron James playing over 40 minutes and playing really well. And I would also argue the Cavs got wrecked. A couple Pacers players shot pretty well, but it wasn't like a triple-double, quadruple-double, amazing performance sunk them. So I'm actually pretty dour. And a large part, too, is here's a player that we have hated forever. Hate's a strong word. We need to come up with like nicer language because people are like, you hate Donovan Mitchell. I'm like, I think he's overrated and I don't like his fans.
We don't like their production is a better way to put it.
Don't like their production. That's very boring, but let's go for it. Jeff Green is a player that we have been baffled by his career because he was a good prospect. We'll give it that, right? He's a 6'8", 6'9", looks super. I mean, he has like the same body type as Kevin Durant. So it's like, looks great. Never amounted to anything. He's had one average season in his NBA career. Another thing I tweeted out this week, Brian, is Jeff Green is now I said ninth player, but the way I should phrase it is this is the ninth time because Marvin Williams has done this twice. This is the ninth time in NBA history that a player has started the first round of the playoffs, played over 20 minutes, took 7 or more shots, and got 0 points. Jeff Green, I hate the stupid meme playing 4-on-5 about players like Ben Wallace or offensive players that don't have outside shots, because that's not true. If they can do other things, they can get offensive rebounds or pass or whatever, they can help. Jeff Green is like playing 4-on-5 right now. J.R. Smith pulled it out at the end, if you look at the popcorn machine, but started really horrible. And then Kyle Korver, who we've liked, is really old and didn't play well. So it's like, I don't know if the Cavs have enough. It's the Derek Fisher principle. I don't know if they have enough around LeBron, Kevin Love, and Larry Nance, and then they're not giving Larry Nance the bulk of the minutes. I don't know if they have enough around those three players, I guess George Hill as well, to win this, especially if they're going to be giving major minutes to players like Jeff Green and J.R. Smith.
Yeah, and that's the problem here. The Cavaliers have so much more talent than the Pacers, and it seems like most of them are healthy now, but they're just playing these really bad lineups. And Jeff Green, not only should he not be starting and not playing 27 minutes, he probably shouldn't even be on the roster.
No.
I mean, it's mean to say, but it's just like, NBA players are the best players in the world, but he is among the worst of those players. And
he's old. He's old. That's another frustrating point. Like, we love it. I'll give full credit. Dirk Nowitzki had an amazing scoring season, but he was a below average player this season.
Yeah. He's coming back. He's coming back officially.
But you know what? Dave Barry had a post on this when Shaq came back with the Boston Celtics. He's like, it costs, if you wanted to get like courtside seats to a big name team like the Celtics, like the Knicks, it would cost many, many thousands of dollars. Shaquille O'Neal got paid $1 million to do that. So why wouldn't you? Dirk Nowitzki, same boat. As long as he is not doing anything to irreparably damage himself, and even then, he's an adult. If he knows the risks, it's on him. You don't go away. The minute you retire, it takes a very rare set of circumstances for you to be even welcomed back, like Michael Jordan. And even if you're welcomed back, you're not going to be the same level. So it's like, I have no fault with older players like Jeff Green taking the payday and getting every minute they can get.
Sure.
This is a bad move on the part of the Cleveland Cavaliers coaching staff. All right, let's give some credit where credit's due, Brian. Our favorite player we love to hate, Donovan Mitchell. He put up the first rookie double-double, like 2010, since Tim Duncan. He had an amazing game. Like I cannot take anything away from him. Utah versus OKC. I think Donovan Mitchell hates me because we wanted if Donovan Mitchell had played well against Portland, Patrick wins $3,000. And then Donovan Mitchell goes into the playoffs, and I'm like, yes. And then he plays really well, but you got to give full credit. But that was an amazingly close series. And here is a fun stat I get to quote out, though, if you're an OKC fan and should be slightly angry. Serge Ibaka had an amazing game one. James Harden had an amazing game one. Kevin Durant had an amazing game one. And Victor Oladipo had an amazing game one. What do those players have in common? They are all former Thunder players. The Thunder are a good team, and I think they were a 55-win team with Kevin Durant, and they've been a 47 and 48 win team the last 2 years, and this year they were a 48 win team with Andre Roberson, who the box score statistics said was amazing, and it's one of those interesting conventional wisdom places where people accept him as a good defender. Conventional wisdom said he was an amazing defender. He got injured, and they ended up at 48 wins. This team has done really well, but if you are a fan of the Thunder, you should be frustrated at what could have been. I won't go over it too much because we talked about this on last week's show, Brian, but essentially, if they stay in Seattle and keep I almost said Jeff Green, James Harden, Russell Westbrook, and Kevin Durant, not only do I think this team wins a title or at least makes a couple more runs, they stop dead in its tracks several other contending teams right now. So it's a fascinating place to be. It was a very close game one. I think it's going to be a very close series. I'm excited to see what happens.
Yeah, and to answer your question from earlier in the show, Dre, these two teams are very close in margin of victory in SRS. The Jazz ended up fourth at 4.47 SRS, and Oklahoma City ended up sixth at 3.42.
Really that good? That is remarkable on both. So I mean,
and they both underperformed their Pythagorean.
But you're also saying both of these teams would be like the favorite to win the East. And what's more, Utah, we noted this. This is important for the Golden State Warriors, for the San Antonio Spurs. They have this Pythagorean win with Rudy Gobert missing like 20, 30 games. Yeah. So they are probably a better team than they appear. And OKC, it's just hard to know. I mean, they're just the only trade that would have been interesting to not happen is imagine if this team doesn't trade Cantor, but does keep, Westbrook, Roberson, Paul George, Cantor, Steven Adams. That could have been a really interesting team. I think it could have been a contender.
So if those two teams teleported into the Eastern Conference, the Jazz would be the second seed behind Toronto. Philadelphia would still be third. And I'm looking at Pythagorean, not actual wins. This is my playoffs, Dre. And then Oklahoma City would be fourth ahead of Boston.
That would be an interesting series to see. I don't have too much else to say. I mean, got a bunch of it. Pelicans Portland. This is just if you didn't watch the game, go to Popcorn Machine and just watch this because the Pelicans are just smoking Portland going into the fourth, and then it turns into a game. I argue it's psychological warfare. One note I'll give you: I'm a little depressed at the Timberwolves with Andrew Wiggins because of this, but Rajon Rondo going to the Pelicans, he got as many assists as Portland did put together. Essentially we've argued that Chicago gave away Jordan Bell, Jimmy Butler, and Rajon Rondo this offseason. They gave away like a playoff squad. So this will be an interesting series. I think I said who knows last week. I keep it with who knows. I mean, obviously Anthony Davis is the best player in the series. We love Rajon Rondo, but Portland's been a really good team. So we'll just have to see what happens.
Yeah, even Drew Holiday has been looking decent. And, of course, Mirotic had an 11 rebound game and a 4 block game in that first game as well. So he's been looking good on defense.
All right, last series. This one, I said it wrong because it is the Rockets Timberwolves. I wrote it as Rockets Thunder on the script. Maybe that's wishful thinking, Brian. Maybe that's a sign of things to come later in the playoffs. But the Rockets, let's give some credit where credit's due. This was a closer game than I would have expected for game one. Let's give a few things. Clint Capella is amazing. I've seen people say it doesn't count as a super team with James Harden, Chris Paul, and Clint Capella. Clint Capella is great. I mean, there might be some restrictions on his minutes because of, conditioning, but we think he's one of the top players in the NBA according to numbers. I forget if he finished first in wins produced or close. He's a great player. I don't think there's any danger of D'Antoni benching him in the playoffs. He did a lot to stifle Karl Anthony Towns and played well on his own. This was like Chris Paul didn't show up for the playoffs. I want to get a comment, tangent, whatever you want to call it on that. One thing I hate when people will note that a player doesn't show up for a game or plays poorly is that is our reason behind constructing super teams or making sure a team has no bad players. I almost said no good players. We're not tanking here. A team has no bad players because you want your team to have the advantage of if Steph Curry has a bad night, or if Kevin Durant has a bad night, or if Draymond Green has a bad night, or if Omri Caspi, rest in peace, or if David West has a bad night, or if Andre Iguodala has a bad night, you want the team to be able to survive that. The risk that a team like the Milwaukee Bucks, and even with them playing well, still runs the risk of losing. The Milwaukee Bucks or the Cleveland Cavaliers have is if LeBron James doesn't show up, they lose. If Giannis doesn't show up, they lose. So Chris Paul didn't show up for game one, but that's the whole reason you put together this is essentially a 70-win team, right? If Chris Paul had played those remaining 20 games that he missed, this team was probably at least an SRS 70-win team. That's fantastic. So I am really excited about what the Rockets are looking like. I actually give credit. Derrick Rose played better. This is crazy. Derrick Rose had a better game one than Chris Paul. I don't expect that trend to continue. And I'll say, like, this is probably the close. I'll jinx this because I've done this before. Like, I think when the Oklahoma City Thunder upset the San Antonio Spurs a few years back, they had like a close loss. And I was like, if that's the best you can do, you're not going to win the series. And they came back to win it. So I'm going to say I don't see anything out of the Timberwolves. I'll jinx myself. I'm just laughing at Derrick Rose is getting minutes still, and Karl Anthony Towns is getting fewer shots than Derrick Rose in the playoffs. Is what it is.
Yeah, I mean, you put it on the script and it was all over Twitter. Let me read out this stat. Game one, Wiggins 15 shots, the most on the team. Rose second with 14. Jamal Crawford had 11 shots as well. Then Jimmy Butler also had 11 and Towns had 9. That is just awful. You cannot do that and win. And Towns didn't shoot that well, but whatever. I mean, look at his body of work this year. Of course, he's going to turn around. He even had, 12 rebounds and a block as well. So he's looking good. Come on, Tibbs. Get him into the game.
Towns is so talented, too, where it's like Kevin Love's the same boat where I actually argue losing Kyrie Irving was bad because they didn't have a point guard in reserve until they got George Hill. But we've noted this, like Kevin Love got worse on Cleveland, and it was just he didn't have the ball in his hand as much. Karl Anthony Towns is so gifted. Just get the ball in his hand and good things happen. And so if you've got the ball in Derrick Rose's hands, not Karl Anthony Towns, you're doing something wrong. All right, that we got through all the series. We'll just have to see what happens, Brian. I'm excited to see what happens tonight with New Orleans versus Portland. I'm rooting for Anthony Davis. I always kind of root for the best players because I always feel annoyed when a good player's legacy is snubbed because they haven't done as well in the postseason. So if we have a player we love, like Anthony Davis, like Chris Paul, like James Harden, I'm always going to root for them unless there's something else on the line.
It's okay, Dre. Even if the Pelicans don't go very far in the playoffs this year, you can root for Anthony Davis when he's on the Warriors next year.
Oh, wow. Is that a legit rumor, or are you just making shit up?
It's just a rumor. Apparently, he's their number one off-season target.
But we
we'll
were
see
joking.
if that happens.
We were joking about this where I was like, yeah, that's okay. Like in a front office, like our goal is to get the number one power forward center in the league. You're like,
it should be everyone's goal, right?
It's like solid plan. That's like that's like a team. When like our plan is to outscore the opponent this game. It's like, well, good. Okay, we see that. Okay, I didn't read this article, so I'll let you recap it. But basically, we noted this a few weeks ago. The NBA had an esports draft for players to play NBA 2K competitively. If you were picked in the first round of this draft, you got $35,000. I think annually was the salary. There were 17 teams. Many people quickly noted this is more money than G League players are making. And I guess as a result, the NBA is
Oh
upgrading the.
no, so that was actually a joke by on my part on the script that I was gonna throw in there, which is like, I wonder if they raise the salaries because I read that article. Probably not. This is probably something that's been in the works for a long time, and is probably a part of that push by Adam Silver to get rid of the one and done players and, bring them in more closely and work with high school players in the NBA. So yeah, we'll see if that happens. We see if they're, since their salary got raised by quite a bit.
In theory, so it looks like it's 7,000 a month. In theory, that's a pretty competitive salary. And I mean, we actually noted this. So this article that you linked, which is at New York Times. So I think they're a reputable source mainly, although they seem to. I'm surprised they didn't ask Trump voters what they thought about this race. But I guess the old salary thing was 26,000 or 19,000. Yeah. So this is really significant raise. Now it's still not great money, and we'd like to see it higher. But I think what's fascinating is, from almost an economic point, if you look at the NCAA versus the G League, and you noted this about a player, I wish I could remember their name, but they actually committed to a school and then decommitted and said they were going to the G League.
Yeah.
If the G League pushes the salary just a little higher, and I think Steve Kyler on Twitter made a note, like if they had like one reserve spot. So if this makes any sense, in baseball, you are allowed to have a minor league farm system, and you're allowed to call players down and pull them up. And the G League kind of has that, although there are these weird two-way contracts that restrict if you can sign players. I don't know the contracts well enough. I haven't read Larry Kuhn's FAQ on it.
So that's another part of this article, actually, Dre. The two-way players are having their salary increased to $77,250.
So actually that was what Kyler was saying, which is saying if all the NBA did was like allow a one spot per G League team to basically be able to stash an NBA player and pay them well, that could legitimately change things about the NCAA. So the G League, fascinatingly enough, and I remain cautiously optimistic because we hate the NCAA around here, they are very, very close to tilting the tide, I think, to making the G League much more appealing than college. And that could honestly see the death of college basketball, especially since so much of college basketball right now, they kind of realize it. It almost feels like smoking, back in the day when shit kind of hit the fan, where it's like you're seeing coaches even concede, maybe we should pay players. You're seeing even the top brass say, maybe we can do this. So we'll actually let them get free food. It's not a big deal that they took a donut from that fundraiser or whatever. Not even joking. I'm fairly certain there's probably been some athlete that got accused of stealing a donut from.
No, I saw some college player who got his school in trouble because he let his brother sleep on his couch in his dorm room. So
stupid. So it's like even the NCAA is realizing they're wrong, but they're still dragging their heels on the student athlete. We shouldn't pay them, whatever. So it's like all the G League has to do is get a little better. And it's like, I mean, for F's sake, if you're capable of getting signed to a G League for $35,000 for 5 months of play, of course you do that over college, because even if you believe a college scholarship is worth $30,000 a semester or whatever, the issue is if you're trying to play competitive basketball at the same time, you don't get the full thing. It's like if I had at this point now, if I had someone that I thought was good enough to be a G League player or go to NCAA, I'd say, here's what you do, dude. Find a really good state school. Find a really good state school you want to go to, save up your G League money. You'll be able to afford that college, and then maybe you go pro. And then one last note on just that NCAA value of a tuition thing, because I feel I'm misrepresenting something that I've argued in the past, is typically if you are good enough to get into a school that is that expensive, you are also good enough to apply for financial aid. I'm going to give a shout out to a really, really old clip from John Oliver. So John Oliver was talking about the Miss America pageants, and they were talking about the value of scholarships. And what they did is they cheated. So the Miss America pageant, the winner would get a bunch of scholarships, but the problem was they got scholarships to like 5 schools. They weren't going to be able to go to all 5 schools, of course. So instead of saying you got scholarships to 5 schools, that's worth $30,000 a year, $60,000 a year, whatever, they just added them up and were like, you got $200,000 a year. It's like, you're not going to go to all 5 scholarships. So the same kind of thing when the NCAA says we gave this person a scholarship worth $60,000 a year, it's like, well, your own financial aid rules say they were eligible for these grants, these whatever, so it's not even worth that much. And then of course that's the sticker price markup, right? It doesn't cost the school $60,000 to send you to school. they're overcharging to make a profit. So you'd have to look at like what it really cost them and then what grants you were eligible for. We've got off on that tangent, but that's kind of good. I do think, Ryan, I think you were joking, but I think I wouldn't be shocked if like the esports thing pushed that.
The timing is kind of funny. And I just have one last thing on the esports.
And the number is the same. They're both 35,000.
Oh, that's hilarious. I didn't notice that. Oh, that maybe there is something to this. The one thing I'll say though, Dre, is that we have to compare apples to apples here. Obviously the NBA is more prestigious than their, esports league, but those players are getting paid to be the best players at that game, basically, right? Similar to the NBA players. So the minor league players in that game are probably getting much, much less than 35,000 or 20, even 19,000.
That is actually a very, very fair and astute point. I'll give that to you. All right. All right. So that's good. You mentioned this. This one's interesting, and I think I'll use it to just make a comment on Kawhi one last time. So I wish there was better data for this. Just a shout out to anybody out there. If you know where there's more concrete data for jersey sales, I would love it. But the most popular jerseys came out. Steph Curry is number one. This is a note I've just made why super teams that despite people saying they hate it, they're wrong. Steph Curry is the number one jersey seller. Having a huge team in a big market is a good thing. Followed by LeBron James, Kevin Durant, and Giannis. I'm actually impressed Giannis managed to make number 4 being in Milwaukee on a, lower seed playoff team. But
the one thing I'll say about Giannis jersey sales though, Dre, is that considering you have to put Antetokounmpo on the back, there's probably not a very big profit margin. You have to spend so much material on the letters, Dre. Just think about it.
All right. Not much else surprising. That's a cool thing to note. Give Jimmy Butler some credit to actually making this list. Now,
Simmons at number 10.
Simmons at number 10. That's only going to go up. I will note this one thing. This was kind of a funny place for him to get placed because I noticed this about the San Antonio Spurs. The San Antonio Spurs on the Forbes evaluation list in their best seasons, I'm talking like made it all the way to the finals, high attendance or whatever, would rank like 10th or 11th on the Forbes evaluation list for top players. Kawhi ranks 11th on jersey sales this year, and I'm sure if we go back in previous seasons. So to the point of him wanting to move out, I mean, just look at that. Like, I think Giannis benefits from being very clearly the number one player on his team with no one else close. I've noted that, the problem with being a Spurs player is you're always going to get called a system player. And then all of these other players, so it's Russell Westbrook and Giannis are like the de facto greatest in a small market. But, the Warriors, the Cavaliers, the Celtics, the Knicks, the 76ers, the Knicks, that's hilarious. The fact that Kristaps Porzingis missing half the season can make number 7 on this list because he's just in New York, I mean, that should tell Kawhi all he needs to know about market size.
Yeah, and he said specifically he wants to move back to California. So that means Lakers, Clippers, Kings.
I mean, LA would not Kings. Please, Kawhi, the Kings have ruined enough players. But Lakers would be fantastic.
LeBron and Kawhi going to the Lakers, that would be interesting.
I love it. All right, this is an interesting piece of news. This was one that was a rumor a while ago. But so what exactly is happening with 538, ESPN, and ABC?
Oh yeah. Let's bring that up. So this is a tweet from Nate Silver here. So for those who don't know, 538 started out as Nate Silver's personal blog way back in the day. They were purchased by the New York Times and built it up on the New York Times website. However, they moved from New York Times to ESPN, and they were owned by ESPN for a while now. However, now they're being, I guess, sold by ESPN over to ABC, another company owned by Disney.
Interestingly enough, this was kind of a point you made when we were talking about it because we kind of said, I've called 538 a mixed bag. I've seen some very good stuff, some iffy stuff there. But you kind of just noted, the big deal for 538 was always election, so it'd be a little odd to get sold right around election season. It's funny, Scott Walker, this was the closest he's come to getting me to want to vote for him when he went off on Twitter and was like, if we're not careful, a blue wave is coming. After I think a special election or whatever. And Scott Walker's the governor of Wisconsin, for those that don't know. A funny freaking note, in that election, one of the big sticking points against his opponent, Mary Burke, was that she plagiarized a speech. Like all of the attack ads on Mary Burke were Mary Burke's a plagiarist. So it's fun. it's fun, Brian. What can I say? It's fun watching Republicans. It's a lot of fun.
And yeah, that's what Nate Silver says in his tweet here. We're excited to work with ABC, combine our strengths as we tackle the 2018 and 2020 elections. And he goes on in these other tweets to say we're gearing up, we're hiring political staff writers. So they're saying they're going to continue to work with ESPN, but that they're pivoting more towards elections. And that makes sense for them. We've thought that's what they're best at compared to all their other stuff, including sports.
I like Ben Morris to a degree. He's one of their writers. It's a funny. I mean, I do like him, so I don't want to get against that. But what I want to say is it's a little interesting. Some like dirty laundry or whatever. I met Neil Payne at a Sloan that I went to like 6 or 7 years ago, and we like went out to dinner with some other I think True Hoop bloggers. And Neil Payne just kept giving me shit about Dave Barry saying that Dennis Rodman was better than Michael Jordan for the Bulls in that second three-peat, because he says that in the Wages of Wins. And it was really weird. Like, it's an annoying circumstance. So I was a little amused that Ben Morris, who, like, his claim to fame is he wrote this really long, fantastic blog series on why on why Dennis Rodman is one of the greatest basketball players ever, basically, like, just so amazing. And so he got hired by 538. So that always kind of amused me a little. On a love-hate thing where I'm just like a little bit of schadenfreude, where I'm like, on the one hand, I like that this site got this person. On the other hand, it's like, it's always weird when you see stuff that you've been getting ridiculed for years be used mainstream. So that is what it is. But it is, we've said 538 is kind of a mixed bag, even their sports stuff. And you're saying here, and I didn't realize, it's just like their sports coverage, this analytical approach to sports isn't really taking off, at least in the direction I think ESPN was expecting. And it's an interesting one for us because we've been kind of very dour on the analytics movement, but I think there's, in basketball in particular, there is this very bizarre area that analytics is in, which is like they don't want to give up mainstream thinking and they don't really want to do great math. And so it puts it's very, like, to get political, like it's very centrist, where it's like, you're not hitting either base, so I'm confused where it's at. So
maybe
it's kind
the
of
New York Times needs to buy 538 again, then, Dre.
That's good job. All right, but that's all I'm going to say is, like, it's one of those where I think there is a thirst and demand for analytics. I'll do a shout out preemptively. I will most likely be attending the I want to get the name correct, Brian, so because it's a long one, but it is the Great Lakes Analytics and Sports Conference. It's actually taking place in Wisconsin this year. I believe
fun.
So it's close to my hometown. It is as far of a drive as a Milwaukee Bucks playoff game, but I'm more than happy. That's taking place in June. I'll make sure to tweet it out at some point this week, since I probably won't do show notes. But there is a very real thirst for analytics in sports that does exist. Sloan, the size of Sloan is huge. But 538 to me, it's like it didn't quite get the formula, and I'm not against that. So I think you were right where you were like 538. Election has been their bread and butter. Although to be fair, like I get a little annoyed too, where if you're going to give Nate Silver all the credit in the world for how right he called the 2012 election with Barack Obama and the 2008 before. It's like his claim to fame came with the 2008 election at his blog 538. And then at the New York Times, the 2012 election, he got 50 out of 50. Although in his own book, he admits that the betting markets also predicted it. So he was basically just using polling data correctly that other political analysts had done. And
right.
In fact,
he's a poll aggregator. That's what he does.
Yeah. And he was basically, that's one of the interesting points. People are like, he's so genius. He's a smart guy. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't. But the point being, this was not a new technique. It was not as if he did something novel. The talking heads may have said one thing, but the political scientists that looked at the polling data in the same way he did, which was not a new technique, agreed with him.
Right, and there's other polling aggregators similar to him that have been around for a while too, and they're all pretty good, right? They're all pretty accurate. The difference with Nate Silver is he's a really good writer and he makes really good charts, and like he just presents it in a really good way. I think that's been his strength.
And you hit it right. Like, I mean, just sometimes the news hits at the right time for you to take off. I mean, it's a very frustrating part of fame and success in the United States. This is why we've always hated the meritocracy argument around here. Meritocracy is the cream rises to the crop. A lot of times it's just, you write a piece. I just mentioned Dave Barry with Dennis Rodman. Dave Barry wrote a book with a point that Dennis Rodman was a better player for the Bulls during their second three-peat. I want that clear. he was a better player than that. He released a book. Malcolm Gladwell just missed it for making it into the book Blink. It was in the expanded section, but didn't make it into the book itself, Blink. And then, as I mentioned, Ben Moore's same story a few years later, that gets him a job at 538. Sometimes your story just hits at the right time. And so that happened. But if you're going to give him all the credit in the world for the 2008 and 2012 elections, he was so anti-Trump in 2016. I didn't really follow 538 that closely, but, a lot of the people at the Cracked podcast, back when they had their full staff of writers, Dan O'Brien was a big Nate Silver fan because he loves presidents. Dan O'Brien, I would hear him quoting 538 on the Cracked podcast, and they were just like, it is such a joke. There's no way in hell Trump, all this historical stuff, this. So it's like, it's an interesting one for me to see a prognosticator get all the credit in the world for 2 elections, and then you ignore the one that not only they whiffed miraculously. Now, if he had come out ahead of time and said, here's what I think, but by the way, there's a lot of stuff that can happen, that's another thing. But if you look at Nate Silver's early Trump stuff, it was like he has no shot in hell. 0%.
So I actually disagree with you here.
Oh, you disagree. Okay.
I disagree with you. So here's basically so there's all these different polling aggregators, right? And what you can look at them all and you can see who's like the most conservative and who's the most aggressive. 538 gave Trump a better chance than anyone else. They were the highest on Trump out of all the major aggregators.
It's fair. Now, to be fair, so there are 2 things I'm talking about here on my argument. I'm talking about early. So like I'm talking even just like the prelims. What are the prelims? Primary.
The primaries.
Prelims to the president, the play-in round, the primaries. No, I'm saying early on in the Trump cycle, he was so negative on it. And like, this is where like Adam Todd Brown, who's a writer at Cracked, who's a big history guy, like the way he said it, he's like, I hope Trump doesn't make it. I don't think he will. But by the way, the comparison he used, sadly, was Hitler's. He's like, here's the set of circumstances that could happen for Trump to get to where he needs to be. And I think there's a very real shot of it happening. And even Rachel Maddow, she was on Hari Kondabolu and W. Kamau Bell podcast. And Rachel Maddow was talking, and she basically, they were like, what do you think the odds Trump gets elected are? And she shrugged her shoulders. She's like, honestly, like 50-50. And this was way before it got to the end, even with the Comey emails and stuff. So I'm saying he was way dour early on, and that was just clearly wrong. And then they were in damage mode, like, towards the actual election. They're like,
I just strongly disagree. Go ahead.
I'm going to get to your last point. Now, you said of the polling aggregators, he was the most open to Trump winning the election. You're right. But here's what he did. And there were some people that looked at it. He basically, like, if you looked at the knobs you could turn on the polling aggregator, he let it open. And the way he got Trump to like the, 30% chance of him winning was basically if you started looking at the actual projections of what they said could happen, it was things like him winning states he had no shot of winning. So even if he said Trump had a thing, all he basically did, and in his book, The Signal and the Noise, he talks heavily against error bars. He just moved the error bars. That's what he did. So I think he was early on in Trump's election, he was very, very dour on Trump and was proven wrong. And when it got close to the election, he just said, I'm just going to give myself some wiggle room. And to your point, it's kind of like the Price is Right. Someone bids $1, so you bid $2.
Yeah, I can't say for sure, but the way I remember that election season going was they just updated their numbers whenever new polls came in. And as the campaign went on and these shenanigans were happening, like you said, that probably stole the election, yeah, he kept moving it closer and closer to Trump as the time went on. And I can't speak for sure. Maybe, like you said, he messed with the error bars. I don't know about that, but from an exterior perspective, it seemed pretty consistent to me what they were doing.
Last, no, I can't believe we got into this discussion because this actually gets to our preseason prediction things. If you have a model that projects something, then the way to judge that model is to say, what are the inputs I gave it and what are the outputs it gave it? And then what were the difference in those inputs? So, I thought Gordon Hayward was going to be worth 10 wins. I thought Kyrie Irving was going to be worth 5. What actually happened? And then, of course, like we said, Bayesian. So the real world thing is you update it.
Yeah.
So if he said, I think there's a very good chance that Trump wins Florida and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, that's one thing. I believe, and, smarter political scientists than I can look at this, that's not what he said. Basically, some people were analyzing his things at Twitter, and I'm going off of memory, so I'm actually apologizing. This is not the right way to do it because I haven't dug. Because I'll give you credit because it's like I realize as soon as I'm going this in. So I'll leave it at that. But I'm saying The right way to judge their predictions isn't, I use this model and I move the error bars and I was more right than other people. It's to say, were the inputs I gave this right versus the outputs versus what actually happened? And did I predict those probably? So.
Yeah, and I just remember it differently. I remember that as the polling moved, 538's aggregation model moved as well. And the polling did move significantly right at the end. But anyway, we may never know the real answer to that.
Right, let's get to the end of the show. We got through a couple tangents. Just a weird shout out. We had the biggest snowstorm in Wisconsin in 100 years, so I was lucky enough to be a part of that. It was kind of nuts. There was a lot of snow. If you haven't checked out the Andre the Giant documentary on HBO, it is great. I'm actually kind of annoyed though. It was an hour and a half, way too short. I would have loved to see this be a miniseries. I could have gone for it. I mean, they managed to have interviews with Vince McMahon, Hulk Hogan, various people that he wrestled with, his family. I didn't realize this guy, and I'm forgetting his name, so I apologize. But there was like his handler, like the person that traveled everywhere with him. So they had interviews with him. They had interviews with the cast and crew of The Princess Bride, and this was all in an hour and a half. So they managed to like tell Andre the Giant's life story in an hour and a half through all that. And for those of you who don't know, like Andre the Giant, one of the biggest wrestling names ever. It was great. I wish there was more of it, but if you haven't checked it out, it's definitely worth checking out. Getting back to the Billy Mitchell saga, for those of you that don't know, Billy Mitchell is the former high score holder in Donkey Kong and Pac-Man, a big name in the arcade high score scene. A lot of controversy has come out recently where it's revealed that in the 90s, 2000s actually, he basically cheated to get the high scores in Donkey Kong. And he has been stripped from the site Twin Galaxies. Twin Galaxies used to hold all of the video game high scores records. My personal take, unfortunately, there have been a lot of controversies about Twin Galaxies recently, is as a repository of high score data, it is just not reliable and kind of needs to start over. They might have videotapes from people that have sent things in, but really the video game high scores that have been stored there just have not been reliable. But the kind of one of the interesting things, and a side project I've been working on, Brian, is one of the claims to fame Billy Mitchell has is he's the first person with a perfect game in Pac-Man. The real world story on this is kind of unfortunate. He played in a live competition against a man by the name of Rick Fothergill. I believe that's how you say it. Rick Fothergill missed a perfect game by 9 dots. The way Pac-Man works, there's a kill screen, the last screen where it's like a half thing. There are 9 dots you can get. So you collect those 9 dots. You can die 6 times. He had died 1 time before the final screen. So he came 9 dots short of getting a perfect score. Billy Mitchell was there. They had an agreement to wait a year to the next time of that contest that they competed in, a live contest, to get the high score. Billy Mitchell then went a month early and got the high score on his own. And, you know, he tries to sell it as it was an arms race between him and the Canadians. No, he had seen someone else get basically a perfect game with an error, if that makes sense, like a complete game shutout, but with 1 error. So, like, you know, how does baseball work for that, right? Like if a person gets on base, you can still do it. I don't know. So that happened. But luckily, Billy Mitchell, all of his records have been stripped, including his Pac-Man record. So Rick Fothergill is now the established first player to ever have a perfect recorded game in Pac-Man history. So that's pretty cool.
All these years later. I have no comments on that, actually. Good job, Rick, though.
The only thing I'll give is I'm a little sad is that the Guinness Book of World Records ran out the clock. I was trying to ping the Guinness Book of World Records about what the actual restraints for Billy Mitchell's high score were, because that's been a big part of this controversy and remains a part of this controversy, in my opinion, is a lot of the reason Twin Galaxies as a repository for high score video games was a problem is they had like referees. These are people who decide if your high score counts that would just vouch for other people. They'd enter illegitimate scores. And my belief from things I've read is that Billy Mitchell's Pac-Man high score was incorrectly labeled at 5.5 hours. It was actually over 6 hours, and that might not actually be applicable for the Guinness Book of World Record. And the problem was, I kept pinging him. I was like, can you tell me what his actual restraints were? Did he have to beat this in under 6 hours, et cetera? And by the time there's a lag time in their response, and they kind of gave me like fluff answers 2 times. They ran out the clock because now they've said that they're dropping a score too. So that's kind of cool, but I'm a little bummed that the Guinness Book of World Records managed to evade a question from me. Anyway, that's everything, Brian. I think I got my shout outs and everything. So if you have any shout outs, I'll let you do that.
I have no shout outs.
All right, no shout outs. Well, I think you had a couple. We already said them earlier. So that's been our show. If you found us not through the website, we have been the Boxscore Geeks show. You can find us at boxscoregeeks.com, and occasionally I write it. It's been a month now, so who knows. Nerdnumbers.com. You can follow us on Twitter. I'm NerdNumbers. Brian is Boxscore Brian. And if you find us on iTunes and Stitcher, flub that segue, but we are on iTunes and Stitcher, the Boxscore Geeks show. Subscribe, upvote, helps us out. We go live every week, twitch.tv/nerdnumbers. I'm going to say usually Tuesday at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, occasionally Wednesday if our schedule has to move around, 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you missed the live show, you can catch the recap on channel Nerd Numbers on YouTube. Thanks so much, and hopefully the playoff round is kind to your team. We'll see you next week.